pair of hands rested on the keyboard. No rings except one, the thin gold band she had worn since 1981, the one Henry had placed on her finger in a church on Millbrook Street on a Saturday afternoon when they were both 26 years old and had nothing except each other and the certainty that that was sufficient. On the table beside the laptop, a printed email. The subject line read, "Regarding the upcoming wedding." On the mantel behind her, the photograph from that Saturday in 1981. The screen showed a list, 14 items. First column, Parker Ashford. Second column, active. And one by one, with the unhurried precision of a woman who had kept books for a family business for 32 years, the status of each item was changing. Active, canceled. Active, canceled! No hurry, no hesitation. The email had come 3 weeks before the wedding. Parker's fiancé had written, "We've decided the wedding should be an intimate occasion with people who truly support us. We hope you understand." Cordelia had read it 3 times. Then she had opened the banking application. At the wedding, Savannah wore white and Parker wore a tuxedo, and the reception was held in a venue that cost more than most people earned in a year. In her garden, Cordelia sat with her coffee and Henry's photograph and the particular quiet of a woman who had made a decision and was at peace with it. 3 weeks later, in the office of attorney Michael Chen Parker, sat across the desk from the man who had managed his mother's finances since Henry died. Parker said, "You're telling me all of it stopped." Michael Chen said Mrs. Ashford canceled every recurring transfer, effective the date of your wedding. Cut to the garden. Cordelia watering the roses, not looking up. They had removed her from the wedding. She had simply stopped paying for everything. And now 14 years of silence had come to an end. Canceled. The email notification arrived at 10:23 on a Tuesday morning. Cordelia heard it from the garden, the tone Henry had set in 2009, a simple chime she had never changed, because changing it would have meant acknowledging that the person who chose it was gone. She set down the small hand rake, wiped her hands on the canvas apron she wore for mornings like this, and walked inside. The laptop was on the kitchen table where she had left it after breakfast. She sat down and opened it. The sender was Savannah Delacroix. The subject line read, "Regarding the upcoming wedding." Cordelia opened it with the attentiveness she brought to correspondence. She did not yet understand the attentiveness of a woman who had learned across 68 years of living that the emails with the vague subject lines were usually the ones that required the most careful reading. "Dear Mrs. Ashford, Parker and I have discussed the wedding guest list at length. We have decided that this should be an intimate occasion with people who truly support our relationship. Unfortunately, we feel your presence would create unnecessary tension. We hope you understand. Warmly, Savannah Delacroix." She read it once. She read it again. She read it a third time, the way she had sometimes read contracts that seemed to say something she could not quite believe they were saying, looking for the alternate interpretation, the subordinate clause that changed the meaning of the main one. There was no subordinate clause. She set the laptop back on the table and looked out the window. The garden was doing what it did in the Ohio May, which was everything simultaneously, the rose beds coming into their first flush, and the maple Henry planted in 1985 in the full leaf of a tree that has decided it is summer and will not be argued with. The white fence along the property edge needed painting. She had been meaning to call someone about it. She thought about Parker, her son, her only child, the person she had held in the delivery room at Mercy General in October of 1988 and had looked at with the specific astonishment of a mother encountering her child for the first time, the astonishment that never fully left you even after 38 years. The person she had taught to drive in the parking lot of St. Andrews on Sunday mornings. The person she had held in the funeral home when Henry's casket was closed, both of them crying in the way of people who do not usually cry and have been overwhelmed past the point of managing it. Parker had seen this email. He must have seen it. And if he had seen it, he had not called her. He had not written. He had not driven the 40 minutes from Columbus to sit at this kitchen table and tell her that Savannah had written something without his knowledge or with it, or anything at all. The phone on the counter had not rung this morning. Cordelia did not reach for it. She went to the kitchen and poured a second cup of coffee and brought it back to the table and sat with it. This was what she had done for 32 years when Ashford's hardware presented a problem that required a response. She did not react. She observed. She assessed. She waited for the correct action to become clear, and then she performed it with the precision that the situation required. She opened the drawer of the writing desk in the corner. Henry's ledger was there, the original one from 1978, the one he had used when the hardware store was a single room on Clement Avenue with $800 in inventory and a handwritten sign in the window. The cover was worn to softness at the corners. She had never converted his early records to digital. Some things deserved to stay in the form they had been made in. She did not open it. She placed her hand on the cover and held it there for a moment, the leather warm from the drawer, the weight of it specific and familiar. She thought, Henry, your son just let someone ban me from his wedding. She sat with that sentence for the time it needed. Then she took the laptop and opened the banking application. The transfer list loaded, 14 items, all status, active, all set to recurring monthly, all established in the period between 2012 and 2019, as Parker's life expanded into the shape of a life that cost considerably more than his income covered. The mortgage payment $3,200 first of every month. The Audi payment $890 15th of every month. The utility bundle. The HOA fee. The insurance premiums, the credit card minimum, Maisie's school tuition, the others. Each one established at a moment when Parker had needed something, and Cordelia had provided it without making the providing into a transaction, because that was not how she understood the relationship between a mother and a child. In 14 years, at an average of $6,800 per month, she had transferred $916,000 into the infrastructure of her son's life. She had told no one. She had not wanted recognition. She had wanted Parker to be all right. She placed her finger on the trackpad. The first item, the mortgage, $3,200 transferred on the first of every month, status active. She clicked on it. Edit recurring transfer. Status drop-down active. She looked at the photograph on the mantel across the room. Henry in the blue suit he had worn because she asked him to, 1981, smiling at her with the expression of a man who found everything about her genuinely interesting, which was the expression she had loved most on his face, and which she still saw clearly enough after 11 years without him to know it precisely. 1 second. She selected canceled. Confirm. Done. 13 remaining. She worked through them the way she worked through the end-of-month reconciliation at the hardware store, which was methodically and without rushing each item completed before the next was opened, the work having its own rhythm that required only attention and the willingness to continue. No tears, no trembling. The trackpad made its small sounds, and the birds outside made their larger ones, and the morning continued around the kitchen the way mornings continued. The last item was the smallest $200 per month to Parker's credit card. She had set it up in October of 2012, the week after Parker graduated, and called her on a Tuesday evening, sounding like a person who had not eaten a full meal in several days. She had not mentioned it again. Neither had he. She clicked. Canceled. Confirm. 14 of 14. She closed the laptop. She finished her coffee. She took the canvas apron from the hook by the back door, put it on, and carried the watering can to the garden. The roses needed water. She had not replied to the email. She had not called Parker. She had not said anything to anyone. In 47 minutes from the opening of the email to the closing of the laptop, she had quietly dismantled the entire financial foundation she had spent 14 years building beneath her son's life. When she turned on the garden tap, the water came out cold and clean and steady, and the only person who knew what had just happened was the man in the wedding photograph on the mantel who had been smiling at her for 44 years and showed no signs of stopping. Iris came through the gap in the fence at 4:15 with the banana bread still warm from the pan, which was how Iris arrived when she had decided someone needed company, but was too respectful to announce the decision in advance. She had been making this crossing for 27 years, since the summer of 1997, when the Delgados moved into the house 2 doors down, and Iris had brought over a jar of her garden tomatoes, and Henry had opened the door and called to Cordelia, who had come to the kitchen and found the beginning of a friendship that had outlasted Henry, and would, she suspected, outlast most things. Cordelia was at the rose bed when Iris appeared, the pruning shears in one hand and the canvas apron on, and she looked up, and the expression on her face was the thing that stopped Iris at the edge of the patio, rather than continuing to the table. Not grief, exactly, not anger. Something that Iris, who had known this woman through Henry's illness and Henry's death, and the years after recognized as the particular stillness that came after a decision had been made and was already irreversible. Iris set the banana bread on the outdoor table. She said, "Cordelia, something happened." It was not a question. Cordelia pulled off her gardening gloves and gestured to the chair beside her own. Iris sat. She put on her reading glasses, the ones she kept on a chain around her neck, and Cordelia gave her the printed email. Iris read it the way she read everything now, slowly and completely, giving each line the attention it required, not skimming the way younger eyes sometimes did. When she reached the end, she held the paper in her lap for a moment and did not say anything. Then she said, "Does Parker know?" Cordelia said, "I don't know. He didn't call." Iris said, "He'll call, though." Cordelia looked at the rose bed. She said, "I don't know that anymore." The garden was quiet around this, the Ohio afternoon, doing what it did in May, warm and unhurried, the maple casting long shadows across the grass, the fence line needing paint. Two women in their late 60s and early 70s, sitting in a garden where one of them had grown roses since 1984, and the other had eaten them from across the fence in every season since 1997. Iris said, "Did you write back?" Cordelia shook her head. She told Iris about the laptop. Not dramatically, not with the editorial commentary that the story invited, but in the plain sequence of events, the way she had always reported things, what happened, and then what happened, and then what she did. The 14 items on the transfer list, the 47 minutes, the sound of the trackpad. She did not tell it as a story of triumph or devastation. She told it as a record of what had occurred. Iris listened without interruption. When Cordelia stopped, Iris was quiet for a moment. She said, "Good." One word. No elaboration. The particular economy of a woman who had decided the situation did not require hedging or qualification, that the appropriate response was acknowledgement rather than analysis. Cordelia said, "I don't know if I did the right thing." Iris looked at her. She said, "Cordelia, you have been paying that boy's mortgage for how long?" Cordelia said, 6 years. Iris said, "And his car?" Cordelia said, 4 years. Iris said, "And the tuition for the child of the woman who just told you that your presence at her wedding would create unnecessary tension." Cordelia was quiet, Iris said, "And in all of that time when Savannah wrote that email, Parker didn't call. He didn't drive over. He didn't write a single word to tell you that he didn't know, or that he was sorry, or that it was wrong. She said it without anger, in the tone of someone narrating what they had observed, which was the most difficult kind of statement because it could not be argued with as an emotional reaction, but only as a factual record. She said, "He let someone write the email. He let someone send it. And he let you sit here alone with it." Cordelia looked at the fence. She said, "Henry would say something now." Iris said, "Henry would say, 'Cordelia, you have been taking care of everyone long enough. Time to take care of yourself.'" Cordelia said, "You remember him saying that?" Iris said, "I don't, but I knew Henry Ashford for 19 years and I know you for 27. I filled in the blank myself." Cordelia made the small sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same direction the sound of a person recognizing something true. Before Iris left, she paused at the gap in the fence. She turned back and said one question. "Are you going to tell Parker about the transfers?" Cordelia considered this. She said, "He'll find out himself when the first bill comes back." Iris said, "Do you want me here when that happens?" Cordelia said, "When it happens, I'll be right here in the garden with the roses, same as every day." Iris went home. The evening came in the way it came in May, slowly, and then all at once the light going gold, and then amber, and then the deep blue that preceded dark. Cordelia sat in the garden until she could no longer see the color of the roses clearly, and then she sat a little longer because the garden at this hour had its own quality that she had learned to receive, rather than interrupt. She looked through the kitchen window at the mantel, the wedding photograph, Henry in the blue suit, 1981, the laptop closed, the printed email on the table. This morning she had been the mother of a son about to marry. This afternoon she had canceled 14 years of financial support in 47 minutes. And she had not cried. She thought perhaps later, perhaps after the wedding. She sat in the garden in the last of the May light and permitted herself to feel the thing she had not yet named, which was not quite relief and not quite grief, but was something in between them, the particular sensation of a weight that you have been carrying so long you stop noticing it and then you set it down and your body does not quite know what to do with the absence of it. Iris had said good. In 27 years it was the most useful word anyone had said to her in this garden. Cordelia called Michael Chen at 8:15 on Wednesday morning. She had been in the garden since 6:30, the habit of early mornings that Henry had started, and she had continued because the morning garden was a different garden from the afternoon garden, and she had come to need both. When she came inside at 8, she made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the laptop for a moment and then picked up the phone. Michael answered on the second ring. She said, "Michael, I need you to confirm something, all the recurring transfers to Parker's accounts. I want to make sure none of them are continuing by accident." Michael was quiet for a moment with the particular quality of a lawyer who has heard something in a client's voice and is processing it before responding. He had been handling her finances since Henry died, since the sale of Ashford's hardware, and the establishment of the investment accounts and all the arrangements of a life that had become unexpectedly solely hers to manage. He said, "Let me send you the complete list to confirm. You want to stop all of them." Cordelia said all of them. She drove to his office at noon. The conference room had the quality of a room designed for difficult conversations, which it was the round table and the chairs positioned to suggest equality and the neutral colors that did not take sides. Michael had the printout ready when she arrived, the full transfer history pulled from the system, and he laid it on the table between them without preamble. 14 rows! Each one with a start date, a monthly amount, and a running total in the right-hand column. Row 1, mortgage payment. Start date January 2015, when Parker and his first serious girlfriend had found the house in Columbus, and Parker had called his mother to say the numbers didn't quite work. $3,200 per month. Running total $422,400. Row 2, vehicle payment, March 2018. The Audi, $890 per month. Running total $85,440. Row 3, Maisie's school tuition. September 2019. The fall after Parker started seeing Savannah and mentioned that the school fees were significant and the timing was complicated. $850 per month, running total $51,000. And the rest? Utilities bundled, HOA fees, insurance premiums both home and auto, the credit card minimum that had been the first thing she established in October 2012 when Parker was newly graduated and had called her on a Tuesday evening from a grocery store parking lot saying he could not quite cover his cart. Michael said, "Do you know the total?" Cordelia said, "I've never added it up. I've never thought of it as a total." Michael turned his screen toward her. $914,632. The conference room held this. Cordelia looked at the number. She said almost $1 million. She stopped. She said, "And he couldn't give me a phone call." Michael did not say anything. He was a lawyer who had learned that the useful response to certain statements was silence, and this was one of those statements. She opened the bag she had brought and took out Henry's ledger. She set it on the table beside Michael's printout, the worn leather cover, the spine reinforced with tape. She opened it to the first page. April 3rd, 1978. Henry's handwriting the straight, unadorned script of a man who had learned to write in an era that emphasized legibility over personality. Opening inventory, $1,200, all savings. She turned to the last page. November 2014, 1 month before Henry died, though neither of them had known at the time that it would be 1 month before Henry died. The last entry paid final business loan, done, free. She had read this entry many times over the years. She had read it standing at his desk the morning after the funeral when she came downstairs at 4 in the morning because sleep was not available and she had needed to be somewhere that smelled like him. She had read it on the anniversary of his death every year since. She had read it when she needed to remember what it meant to build something from the beginning and hold it together across decades. Free. She placed the ledger beside the printout, the first entry and the last entry of Henry's working life, and Michael's number $914,632. She said Henry worked for 36 years to build something. He left everything to me, and I gave $900,000 of it to our son who could not save a seat for me at his wedding. Michael said after a moment, "What would you like to do with the money now? The money that will no longer be transferred." Cordelia closed the ledger. She said, "I don't know yet. But I know it won't go to anyone who doesn't need it, and it certainly won't go to anyone who doesn't value it." She left the office at 2 o'clock with a copy of the transfer list and the final total in her bag. She did not drive home. She drove to Riverside Cemetery where Henry had been since January 2015 under the oak tree she had chosen because Henry had always liked the oak tree in their backyard, and she thought he would want something similar for the long stay. She stood at the stone for a while. The May wind came through the oak leaves with the sound that oak leaves made, which was a heavier sound than other trees, more deliberate. She held the paper. She said, $914,000, Henry. I gave him $914,000, and he let someone ban me from his wedding. The wind moved through the tree. She said, "I'm sorry. I should have stopped sooner." She did not elaborate on what she was sorry for because Henry would have known. He had always known which part of a thing she was apologizing for, which was the gift of a man who had paid attention to her for 34 years. She stayed until the wind changed direction. Then she drove home. The roses needed water. She had been doing the right things incorrectly for a long time. The money had been right. The timing had been wrong. The love had been real. The form it took had been mistaken. Henry had known how to stop. His last entry said so. Free. She was learning. Savannah Delacroix came down the aisle at Rosewood Manor at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning in a dress that had cost $6,800. This was to the dollar the amount Cordelia transferred each month to keep Parker's life at the level he had come to consider normal. Savannah did not know this. The venue held 120 guests in the particular arrangement of a wedding reception hall that had been designed to look as though it had always been this way, the flowers and the lighting and the draped fabric that concealed the utilitarian walls beneath. The band played the processional from a platform near the window. The champagne was chilling. The photographer moved through the space with the invisible efficiency of someone who had done this many times and knew where to stand. At the front of the room, in the first row of chairs on the left, there was an empty seat. Parker stood at the altar in the dark blue tuxedo and watched Savannah come toward him, and he was by any visible measure a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. Handsome, composed, smiling the smile of a groom for a room full of people who had come to see him smile. But his eyes moved once to the empty chair. He had known for 3 weeks that the chair would be empty. He had not called. 12 miles away, Cordelia was in the garden. She had been there since 6:30, which was when she was always there wearing the canvas apron over the jeans and the gray sweater, because that was what the garden required. And she had not been to a wedding that morning and was not going to one. She had her coffee. The roses were doing what they did in the 3rd week of May, which was everything they could manage the beds in full flush. The blooms of the deep red climber along the fence that Henry had planted in the first year they were in this house because he said, a house needs something climbing on it to look like it intends to stay. Iris came through the fence gap at 9 with a cutting of lavender from her own garden. She said, "For your table, smells better than anything they have out at Rosewood Manor." Cordelia took it and breathed it in and put it in the small vase on the outdoor table. At 11 o'clock, when she knew the ceremony was beginning, Cordelia set down her pruning shears. She looked up at the Ohio sky, the May blue of it, the clouds moving at their own pace. She thought about Parker at the altar. She thought about the way he had looked at age 7 in the Christmas photograph she had kept on the mantel for 15 years. that specific expression of a child who has just been given something and has not yet decided if it is as good as he hoped. Then she picked up the shears and went back to work, not because she was not feeling it, because this was what she had always done when she was feeling it, which was continue. She had continued when Henry's diagnosis came. She had continued when the business accounts were complicated, after he died. She had continued for 14 years of monthly transfers, each one a continuation of the decision to keep going. At Rosewood Manor, the best man gave his speech. He spoke about Parker's father. He said, "Henry Ashford, we wish you could be here today." He raised his glass to Henry. The room raised their glasses. Nobody mentioned Cordelia. Not in the best man's speech, not in the maid of honor's remarks, not in the small printed program with the names of the wedding party and the order of the ceremony and the acknowledgments for the people who had made the day possible. The people who had made the day possible financially and materially across 14 years of transfers, totaling $914,000, was not acknowledged in the printed program. Savannah smiled at Parker across the reception table, and Parker smiled back, and the band played. Iris returned in the afternoon with sandwiches and a bottle of white wine. She said, "I thought you shouldn't have lunch alone today." They sat in the garden, the two of them, with the sandwiches and the wine and the lavender on the table and the roses doing their May work around them. Iris talked about her nephew's new job and the cat that had appeared in the yard of the house across the street and a book she was reading that she couldn't decide if she liked or didn't. She did not talk about the wedding. She did not ask Cordelia how she was feeling or what she was thinking or whether she had any regrets. She offered the ordinary, which was the hardest and most generous thing to offer. Cordelia accepted it. In the evening, Parker and Savannah climbed into the car that would take them to the hotel that had been booked for months and paid for from accounts that bore Savannah's name because Savannah had earned the money for it herself, which was true she had, and which had nothing to do with the accounts that bore Parker's name and had been maintained by someone else's money for most of their existence. In the car, Savannah said, "See, everything was perfect. I told you we didn't need her there." Parker was looking out the window at the streetlights going past the suburban lights of Columbus at 9 in the evening, the ordinary lights of a city, doing what a city did on a Saturday. He did not answer. Savannah did not notice. She was looking at her phone at the photographs the photographer had already uploaded to the preview gallery, the ones where her dress photographed exactly as she had hoped, and the flowers were the right color, and the light through the Rosewood Manor windows was the warm gold of late spring. In the photograph of the ceremony, if you knew where to look, you could see the empty chair in the front row. Parker had not told the photographer to avoid it. He had not done a great many things. Cordelia sat in the living room that evening with Henry's photograph on the mantel above the dark fireplace, and the laptop closed on the table and the soda kai in her lap. She did not open it for the content. She opened it to feel the weight of it, the worn leather, the decades of entries in Henry's handwriting, the particular texture of something that had been used and kept and used again. She turned to the last page. Paid final business loan, done, free. She had read this entry many times. Tonight it meant something it had not meant the other times. Free was not only about the loan. She understood that now, in a way, she had not understood it before sitting in the dark house on the evening of her son's wedding with $914,000 still in her account, instead of flowing into a life that had been built on her silence and her money and her willingness to keep going without being asked how she was. Free was what Henry had been working toward all along. She ran her finger across the word. 12 miles away, the last of the champagne was being poured. Here there was only the quiet house and the photograph and the garden through the dark window and a woman who had been someone's invisible foundation for 14 years and had stopped being it 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning in 47 minutes. The wedding had been perfect, and for the first time in 14 years, not $1 of it had been hers. Parker came home from Hawaii on a Tuesday afternoon. He and Savannah came through the front door of the house on Elmwood Drive with the particular energy of people returning from a honeymoon, the slight disorientation of re-entering a life that has been paused for a week. The bags heavier going back than they were going out with the addition of the things purchased in the shops of Waikiki and Maui. Savannah set her bag down in the hallway and stretched. Parker carried the larger suitcase to the foot of the stairs and went to the kitchen for water, and saw the stack of mail on the table that the neighbor's daughter had collected while they were away, as arranged and sorted into the approximate order of arrival. He flipped through it with the inattentiveness of someone who expected nothing interesting from mail. The envelope from the bank was third from the top. He opened it with the same inattentiveness. The first line read, "Notice mortgage payment. Declined June 1st. He read it again. He said to the kitchen and to himself and to the general proposition that systems sometimes made errors, probably a glitch. He called the bank number on the letterhead. He waded through the automated options and the hold music and arrived at a customer service representative who asked how she could help. He explained the letter. He gave his account information. He said there had probably been an error with the automatic payment. The representative checked her screen. She said Mr. Ashford, the recurring mortgage payment from Mrs. Cordelia Ashford's account, was canceled on May 13th. No payment was processed for June. The account that was funding the transfer is no longer set up for automatic disbursement to this mortgage. Parker said canceled. Who canceled it? She said the account holder, Mrs. Cordelia Ashford. He stood in the kitchen of the house on Elmwood Drive and held the phone and did not say anything for a moment. He ended the call. Savannah came into the kitchen in the way she moved through rooms she considered hers, with the ease of ownership. She looked at his face. She said, "Is something wrong?" Parker said, "My mother stopped paying the mortgage." Savannah stopped moving. She said, "What do you mean she stopped paying it?" She said, "What do you mean she was paying it?" Parker sat down at the kitchen table. He did not answer immediately. In the silence between his wife's question and his response, Savannah began to understand that she was about to learn something about the man she had married 3 weeks ago, that she had not known, had not asked, and perhaps had not wanted to know. And the understanding arrived in the particular way of information that reorganizes other information retroactively, that makes you reconsider a series of things you thought you understood. Parker opened his banking app. He looked at it in the way that people look at things they have been not looking at for a long time and are now being forced to see clearly. The checking account balance adequate for their current spending, as it usually was funded monthly by an amount that Parker had understood as his own money, in the way that water from a tap is understood as water without particular thought about the infrastructure that delivers it. The recurring deposit from his mother's account had not arrived. He called the auto finance company. The representative confirmed that the June payment for the Audi had been returned for insufficient automatic funding and was now 30 days past due. He opened his email and found in the folder he had set up to automatically sort financial notifications to 3 messages he had not read. The insurance company. The HOA Maisie's school. Each one a variation of the same notification. Payment not received. Please update billing information or contact your account holder. Savannah was standing at the kitchen counter reading the bank letter over his shoulder now, and Parker could feel the quality of her attention change as she read it. The shift from confusion to a sharper thing, the thing that arrived when the shape of a situation became clear, and the shape was not what you had assumed. She said, "How long has she been paying the mortgage?" He said, "Since we bought the house." Savannah said, "Since 2018. He said, "Yes." She said, 6 years. "And you never told me." Parker looked at the table. He said it was something she wanted to do. She didn't want us to struggle the way she and my dad struggled in the beginning. She set it up, and I didn't think about it as something that needed to be discussed. Savannah said, "You didn't think I needed to know that someone else was paying our mortgage." He said, "It wasn't I didn't think of it that way." Savannah said, "What about the car?" He said, "Since 2018. She said, "The insurance." He said, "Yes." She said, "Maisie's school." Parker did not answer immediately, and the not answering was its own answer, and Savannah looked at him with the expression of a woman recalibrating a significant number of things. Simultaneously, the expression that arrived when the floor you thought you were standing on revealed itself to be supported by something you had not known was there. "She said so when I told you we didn't need her at the wedding." Parker said, "I should have said something then." "She said you didn't say anything then." He said, "I know." The kitchen was quiet in the way of a room that has received information and has not yet decided what to do with it. Parker opened Michael Chen's number in his phone. Michael, who had handled his mother's finances since his father died. Michael, who would know. Michael answered on the second ring. Parker said, "Michael, my mother canceled the transfers." Michael said yes. Parker said all of them. Michael said all of them. Effective May 13th. Everything was processed through the appropriate channels and confirmed by your mother directly. Parker said, Did she say why? Michael was quiet for a moment with the quality of a lawyer who knows more than he is going to say and is determining the precise amount he will say. He said, "Parker, I think you should call your mother." Parker set the phone on the table. He looked at the stack of mail, the bank letter on top, now the mortgage payment declined visible from where he was sitting. He looked at Savannah across the table. He thought about the email she had sent his mother 3 weeks ago. The email he had seen in draft on her laptop had said he would handle it, and had then not handled, had let go out without the conversation he had promised himself he would have with her, and had not had let become the email that was sent and received and never answered. He thought about his mother reading that email. He thought about her not calling, not answering, not doing any of the things she usually did when Parker created a problem, which was call and ask what she could do. Instead, she had opened the laptop and done the bookkeeping. He said quietly to the table and to himself and to the general reckoning that had arrived 3 weeks later than it should have, and landed as these things do at the least convenient possible moment I need to call her. Savannah said, "Yes, I think you do." She said it with the tone of a woman who had just understood that she had been living in a house that someone else had been paying for and had expressed in the clearest possible way available to her that the person paying for it was no longer welcome. The Audi was in the driveway. The mortgage payment was 30 days late. The stack of notifications from the insurance company, the HOA, and Maisie's school sat in Parker's email folder, still unread, but now impossible to not read. 14 years of invisible infrastructure had made its presence known by its absence. And Parker Ashford, sitting at the kitchen table of the house his mother had been paying for since 2018, was finally going to have to look at the foundation he had been standing on and hadn't known was there. Parker did not call. He sat at the kitchen table for 3 minutes after Savannah said his name from the doorway, said it with the particular quality of a woman who has just understood that the architecture of her life was built on a foundation she did not know existed, and is now looking at her husband and waiting for him to do something with that information. He said, "I'm going over there." Savannah said, "Right now." He said, "I need to talk to her in person, not on the phone." It was the most responsible sentence he had produced in recent memory, and he was aware of this as he said it, which was its own kind of information. He drove. The 12 miles between Elmwood Drive and his mother's house on Millbrook Street were 12 miles he had driven many times over the years, but had not driven in the direction he was driving them now, which was toward rather than away, and with the specific purpose of being present for something rather than avoiding it. He had not been to his mother's house since before the wedding, before the email even. He had let 2 months become the background of his life, the way that most things became background when you were not paying attention, which was gradually and then completely. On the highway, the memories arrived. His college graduation, his mother in the front row alone because his father had been dead for 7 years, by then wearing the green dress she had bought for the occasion. When he crossed the stage, she had stood. He had seen her standing from the corner of his eye and had looked at the middle distance rather than at her, because he was 22 and self-conscious about being seen receiving a mother's pride in public. The day he bought the house. The envelope she had handed him at the kitchen table thick with the cashier's check she had arranged, without being asked and had not mentioned until she placed it in front of him. Down payment? I took care of it. He had said thank you and moved on to talking about the house because thank you felt sufficient, and he had not considered that it might not be. The Tuesday evening in 2012, the grocery store parking lot. He had called her because he did not know who else to call, and she had answered and said, "What do you need?" And he had told her, and she had arranged it before he got home. Each memory arrived with the quality of evidence rather than sentiment, the way a ledger showed you what had been transacted rather than what it had felt like at the time. He turned onto Millbrook Street. The white fence, the maple Henry had planted, the roses coming over the top of the fence in the second flush of June bloom. His mother was in the garden. Of course she was in the garden. She was cutting back the stems on the far rose bed with the small pruning shears, working with the methodical attention she gave to the garden, which was the same methodical attention she gave to everything, and she looked up when his car stopped in front of the house. She did not look surprised. He got out of the car. He walked to the garden gate and stood there with his hands at his sides, and nothing in them, no offering, no prepared speech, nothing except the information he had arrived with, and the weight of the 2 months he had not been here. He said, "Mom." She looked at him. She set the pruning shears on the table beside her, not hastily but deliberately, the way she placed things when she was transitioning from one activity to another and was not in a hurry. He said, "I just found out. The mortgage, the car, the insurance, Maisie's school, all of it." She said, "Yes." He said, "How long?" She said, 14 years, since you graduated. He said, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She looked at him across the garden with the look that he had been receiving his entire life, the look that was not anger and was not disappointment, and was something more specific than either the look of a woman who had been paying close attention for a very long time. She said, "Why did you never ask?" The garden held this. The birds continued. The roses continued. The May afternoon continued in the complete indifference of the natural world to the human accounting happening beneath it. Parker said, "I'm sorry." Cordelia looked at him. She said, "I know you are." She said it without warmth and without coldness, as a fact she accepted. "But I need to know something, Parker. Are you sorry because you didn't know about the money, or are you sorry because you let Savannah send that email?" The silence lasted long enough that the birds filled it. Parker said both. He said it the way true things were said when a person had stopped managing the impression they were making and was simply saying what was accurate. He said, "I knew about the email. I saw it before she sent it. I told her I would handle it. And then I didn't. I didn't call you. I didn't come here. I stood at the altar and I saw the empty chair and I didn't do anything." He stopped. He said, "I left you alone." His voice broke at the last word. Not dramatically. The small fracture of a voice that has been holding something and has reached the limit of what it can hold. Cordelia stepped toward him, not to embrace him, not yet. She moved closer the way you moved towards something that needed to be seen more clearly. She said, 47 minutes. That's how long it took me to stop all of it. From the time I opened the email to the time I closed the laptop. 47 minutes to undo 14 years. Parker said, "Can you start it again?" Cordelia said I could. A pause. She said, "But I won't. Not now. Perhaps not ever." Parker nodded. Slowly, with the quality of a man receiving something he had earned, rather than a man being denied something he was owed. He said, "What do I do now?" Cordelia said what adults do. You pay your mortgage. You pay for your car. You live within what you earn. She looked at him. She said the way your father did, the way I did. Parker, 14 years was enough. It is time for you to stand on your own. He stood at the gate of his childhood garden. He had driven 12 miles to ask why the money stopped. He had found instead a question he could not have answered a year ago, but was answering now in a garden where his father had taught him to grow things, and his mother had been present every day for 2 months he had not come. It was not punishment. It was the lesson that should have been learned 20 years ago, arriving late, and landing as late things do with the full weight of everything that had accumulated in the waiting. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Cordelia was in the garden when she heard the mail slot, which was the sound Henry had installed in 1983 because he believed a proper house needed a proper mail slot rather than a box at the end of the drive, and she came inside and found the envelope on the floor of the entry hall. Not an email notification, not a text. An envelope white standard addressed in Parker's handwriting, the same handwriting she had watched develop from the careful block letters of first grade through the hurried cursive of high school to this, the adult hand that was recognizably his, with the particular way he made a capital M, that he had gotten from Henry. She picked it up. She sat at the kitchen table. The same table. the same chair she had been sitting in 4 weeks ago when the email arrived from Savannah Delacroix with the subject line regarding the upcoming wedding. She opened the envelope carefully. The letter was on ordinary white paper, not the nice stationery that was available in any office supply store, just the paper that was in a printer tray, and it had been written by hand rather than typed, which meant it had been rewritten at least once because there were no crossed-out words, and a handwritten letter without crossed-out words was a letter that had been copied from a draft. He had taken time with it, she read. Mom, I'm writing instead of calling because I want you to have time to read this and think and not feel like you have to respond right away. I've spent the past week thinking about what you said, about the 14 years, about the $914,000. He had written out the number. I asked Michael Chen to send me the full list. I sat down and read every line. I can't believe I didn't know, but the truth is I didn't ask. And that's my fault, not yours. She stopped reading. She looked out the window at the garden, the roses in their June fullness, the maple throwing shade across the far bed, the white fence that she had finally called someone to paint 2 weeks ago, and that was now the white it had been meant to be. She thought about Henry in this garden in the summer of Parker's 15th year, teaching him to run the mower in straight lines, because Henry believed that the way you cut grass told you something about the way you approached most things. Henry had said something that summer. She had been near enough to hear it. He had said the man who pays his own way is the man who's free. Parker had been 15 and had said yes, Dad, in the way of 15-year-olds who are agreeing in order to be done with the conversation. She kept reading. I remember Dad used to say the man who pays his own way is the man who's free. I never understood that until this week. I've never paid my own way. Not really. You did it for me, and I let you without ever thinking about what you were giving up to do it. Cordelia set the letter on the table. She heard the fence gate. Iris came through with the particular quality of a woman who has made this crossing enough times to know when something has changed in the house before she reaches the door. She stopped in the kitchen entry. She said, I can come back. Cordelia said no. Come in. You should read this. Iris sat down and put on her reading glasses and read the letter from the beginning, taking the time she took with everything she read, and Cordelia watched her friend's face move through the paragraphs and did not rush her. When Iris reached the end, she set the letter on the table between them. She said the boy is learning. Not he's changed. Not he's fixed. The boy is learning with the careful precision of a woman who had seen enough of human nature to know that learning and changed were different categories, separated by significant distance. Cordelia picked up the letter and read the last section again. Mom, I'm not asking you to start the transfers again. I don't expect that, but I want to ask you something different. I want to take you to dinner. Just the two of us. No Savannah. I want to start over. Not as your son who takes your money. As an adult, having dinner with his mother. If you're willing, Friday, 7 o'clock, Caruso's. The Italian place where you and Dad used to take me. I'll be there. Whether you come or not, I'll understand. And below his signature, a postscript. I know I can't fix 14 years in one dinner, but I hope that's where it starts. Iris said, will you go? Cordelia was quiet long enough that the birds outside went through a full exchange and began another one. She said, I've spent 38 years giving that boy everything, and 4 weeks learning how to stop. She looked at the letter. I don't know if I'm ready to start giving again, Iris said, but he's not asking for money. He's asking for dinner. Cordelia looked at her friend. Something in her face changed, not dramatically, not the visible relief of a person who has been given permission, but the smaller thing that came before relief, the thing that was the possibility of relief, not yet accepted, but no longer entirely refused. She said dinner. Just that. She picked up the letter. She carried it to the mantel above the fireplace. She placed it beside the wedding photograph beside Henry in the blue suit, and herself in the dress she had chosen carefully, and the expression of two people who were 26 years old and understood nothing yet about what they were beginning. 4 weeks ago, she had placed Savannah's pier eyes. Parker arrived at Lombardi's at 6:45. He chose the corner table without thinking about it because the corner table was where the Ashford family had always sat in this restaurant since the first time Henry and Cordelia had brought him here for his 6th birthday, and he had eaten half a plate of spaghetti and fallen asleep in the booth on the drive home. The table had the same red cloth, the same candle in the same kind of holder, the same menu which had not changed substantially in 30 years, because Lombardi's understood that its customers came for the thing they had always come for. He ordered water. He waited. At 7 o'clock the door had not opened with his mother in it, and Parker sat with his water and did not reach for his phone to call her. He had promised in the letter that he would wait, and he was waiting. And in the waiting, he was understanding something about what it felt like to be uncertain whether someone you needed would come, which was something he had never had to understand before, because he had always been the person who did not come, rather than the person who waited. 7:12. The door opened. Cordelia stood at the entrance for a moment with the quality of a woman who has made a decision and has arrived at the physical location of the decision and is taking one breath before proceeding. She was wearing a blue dress, simple, the kind that had been purchased for a specific occasion and had stayed in the closet for years, between occasions the dress Parker recognized from a photograph his father had taken in 1994 on their anniversary dinner. She had dressed for this. Parker stood. He stood the way you stood when your body acted before your mind had instructions, the automatic response of a person encountering something they had been uncertain of and are now certain of in the best possible way. He said, "You came." She crossed the room to the corner table and sat down, and they looked at each other across the candle and the red cloth and the menu they both knew by memory. They ordered what they had always ordered: spaghetti carbonara for Parker, lasagna for Cordelia, garlic bread for the table. When the server left them, the silence had the quality of a silence between two people who are relearning the particular rhythm of each other's company, which is different from the silence of estrangement and different from the comfortable silence of people who have never been apart. Cordelia said, "I read your letter 3 times. Parker said, "I wrote it 7 times. The first version was bad." She almost smiled. She said, "I could imagine." She said, "Do you know what made me decide to come?" He shook his head. She said, "You didn't mention money, not once in the whole letter." They ate. They talked about small things, the things that had not been talked about in the years of distance, the things that were the actual texture of a life. Cordelia told him about the new rose variety she was trying, a climber she had seen in a catalog that was supposed to bloom twice in a season, if you pruned it correctly at the right time. Parker told her about his job, the opportunity he was considering something more stable and less reliant on the quarterly performance that had been making him anxious for 2 years. He told her about Maisie. He said, "She really likes to draw. She fills up notebooks." He said, "I want you to meet her. Savannah hasn't brought her to meet you. I should have done that on my own. That was my fault." Cordelia looked at her son talking about a 7-year-old girl who liked to fill notebooks with drawings, and she felt the thing that arrived when you saw the person someone was becoming rather than the person they had been. Near the end of the meal, Parker set his fork down. He said, "I need to say this to your face, not in a letter." He said, "I sold the Audi. I canceled the golf membership. Savannah and I are going to sell the house and move somewhere smaller." Cordelia looked at him. He said, "Savannah doesn't agree. She said if I want to live like this, she doesn't want to be part of it." A pause. He said, "I told her she didn't have to be." Cordelia placed her hand over his on the table. The first time she had touched him since the garden, since before the wedding, since before the email that had started everything or finished everything, depending on which way you read the sequence. She said, "Your father would be proud of you tonight." Parker looked at her, and his eyes were wet in the way of a person who has been holding something for weeks and has arrived at the moment of setting it down. He said, "I don't know if I can do this. Without you. Without the money." She said, "You will, because now you have no other choice. And that is exactly how your father started, with $1,200 and an empty hardware store and nobody paying his mortgage." He nodded. They stayed until the candles had burned low and Lombardi's was beginning to clear its other tables, and then they walked out into the June evening, the warm air, and the yellow streetlights and the ordinary beauty of a Tuesday night in Ohio. At the car, the used sedan, not the Audi, Parker held his mother for longer than he had held her in years. She felt the weight of him, her son 38 years old and finally standing on uncertain ground for the first time, and holding on to her not because he needed her money, but because she was his mother and she was here. He said I'll call, I promise. She said I'll be here. She watched his taillights until they were gone. Then she took out her phone and called Iris. Iris answered on the second ring. Cordelia said I'd just had dinner with my son. She said for the first time in 38 years he was an adult. She drove home in the June dark and went into the garden for a while, because the garden at night had its own quality, the roses visible as shapes in the dark, the air carrying what the day had collected. Then she went inside and sat at Henry's desk. She opened the ledger. She turned to the last page. November 2014. Paid final business loan. Done. Free. She took the pen from the cup on the desk. Below Henry's last entry in her own handwriting, she wrote, "Now it's his turn." She closed the ledger. She placed it back in the drawer. She turned off the desk lamp and went upstairs, and for the first time in 4 weeks, slept the sleep of a woman who has finished something and is ready for whatever comes next.